Okay, this is going to be interesting. All right, timer, I'm ready. Where are you? Okay, gotcha. Pete and Repeat were sitting on a fence. Pete fell off. Who was left? Repeat. Pete and Repeat were sitting on a fence. Pete fell off. Who was left? Repeat. I'm not going to do this for 5 minutes, don't worry. I'm going to tell you, Toastmaster of the day, fellow Toastmasters, about a different Pete and Repeat. And I'm not trying to copy Debbie's speech in any way, although there's going to be some elements that are similar. When I was a teenager, my mother and I looked alarmingly alike. There was one time we were standing on a line someplace, I can't remember what we were waiting for, and some complete stranger comes up to us and says, "Did you know that you look exactly like your daughter? You could be Pete and Repeat." Well, that's who we were from there on, except occasionally when we tell people we were clones, which wasn't quite true. But we could have been. It was an alarming resemblance. It was so much so that we even went out and sometimes bought similar clothes to make it more. And because we were approximately the same size, and unlike my daughters, who wouldn't be caught dead wearing clothes that I wear, my mother and I actually shared clothing. And so that confused things for people even more. Even today, occasionally we'll both have bought the same sweater from Land's End and show up at Thanksgiving dinner wearing the exact same thing. I wanted to share with you, if I can figure out how to do this now, the picture of my mother and me when I was about 16. And people thought we looked exactly alike. This is Pete and Repeat.
Up at the top, you can.
Got it. It's the red button. Great. My mother was a librarian. She worked for the Montgomery County Public Libraries for most of her career. She was at Chevy Chase, she was at Davis, Rockville, Twin Brook, Aspen Hill. She was all over. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be just like her. I wanted to be a librarian too. And I did in fact work at Bethesda Library for a couple of years shelving books. As a result of this working in the library, we had a strange experience. Because my mother worked at the reference desk and worked in many of these libraries, she worked with many of the local teenagers, high school students, helping them do their homework. One day, probably 10 or 15 years ago, I'm at one of the libraries checking something out, and a fellow comes up to me, and he looks kind of familiar. I can't quite place him. And he looks at me and he says, "You look familiar. Do you have a daughter named Laura?" He said, "No, I don't have a daughter named Laura. I am Laura." Turns out this was a fellow who was in summer theater with me way back when we were in college. I was in the pit orchestra, and he was on stage, or perhaps he was one of the people running the program. But anyway, I did know him, but he didn't look anything like he had 25 years earlier, and I didn't either, but I looked exactly like my mother did 25 years earlier. That was really something. This occurred to me as I was watching myself on Zoom, as you all are looking now, a few weeks ago. I think I was Toastmaster of the day, or it might have been one of the table topics, and I was suddenly struck by the fact that it was my mother on the screen. It was the hair, because mine is usually short, but it's grown out during the pandemic, so now it looks more like hers. And I guess the glasses are the same, and the mannerisms were the same. I heard her voice coming out of me, and it was like, oh my God, that's my mother over there. And it really struck me that I still look very much like her. But it's not even just a physical resemblance, although I can share that one as well. And you'll see that, figure this out.
Down at the bottom.
I got it. There's just a lot of things to click. This is maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and there's still a certain resemblance there that you can really see that it's still Pete and Repeat, just in a little different version. Thinking about this, it must have been around Mother's Day when I started working on my speech. And I started in plenty of time, Scott, but I didn't finish it till this evening, so I didn't manage my time as well as I would have liked to. I went to some websites that talked about mother-daughter twins. And I'm not going to talk about twins either, because I know between Menashe and Kurt and Jennifer, you all know way more about twins than I do, because I have no twins in my family. But still, looking like someone else, you have a certain perspective on this. So they said, if you're one of these mother-daughter twins, these situations will sound familiar to you. Number one, people call you by your mother's name. Well, they do that, and we had an example of that, but of course my father's called me by my mother's name my whole life. Also, he called me by my brother's name, he called me by the cat's name. I call my kids by whatever name comes to mind first. So I'm not sure that that's the only indication. Then they said, when you look at pictures of your mother as a child, you think it's you. Well, I certainly can pick her out of any class picture from her childhood, but there's that generational difference. First of all, the styles are all wrong, and the other thing was her childhood was all in black and white, and mine's all in color. So if it's a black and white picture, I can be pretty sure it wasn't me. The third thing they say is that people come up to you and say, you look just like your mother. That really resonates, for sure it does. Now that we've been in the pandemic, I used to go and walk. She's living at Ring House with my father. We used to go and walk every Sunday, and we would go and look at the duck pond and everything, and people would note how much we look like each other. But since the middle of March, we haven't been able to see each other at all, except on Zoom, which really is not quite the same thing at all. And she's also starting to have more marked dementia. So a few weeks ago, my father was in the hospital, and I was getting calls every half hour from my mother saying, do you know where your father is? We can't find him. And I would tell her he's in the hospital, and half an hour later, she wouldn't remember that. And that's really resonated with me in terms of me being like her. It's not so much the physical resemblance now, but I am becoming my mother in that now I'm starting to take care of her. It's just a totally new phase, and I'm just sort of slipping into that role. But no matter how much that happens, she's always going to be Pete, and I'm always going to be repeat. Thank you.